morning, and good afternoon to in-house counsel from all across North America and sometimes the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time, perhaps your dinner time with us. And special thanks to our fantastic sponsor, Lexion. In-House Connect would not exist without our sponsors, so we're very appreciative. And of course, our fantastic presenters today who have taken time out of their busy schedules to make this presentation and help us all get better at being in-house lawyers. Our presenters, Jessica Nguyen and Laurie Ehrlich, for putting on a fantastic presentation on key metrics and KPIs for in-house counsel. For those of you here for the first time, let me give you a quick bit of background on In-House Connect. In-House Connect started over 11 years ago as a New York City-based meetup group for in-house counsel. Every month, we would be hosted by a different law firm for free CLE and cocktail networking receptions. And then every 6 months, we would organize fun and festive networking mixers. Over the years, we've helped thousands of in-house counsel connect with peers and outside counsel alike. The group was humming along, and then, of course, COVID hit. We couldn't meet in person, so we went online, and it's been a fantastic transition. We've been able to attract a much larger audience of in-house counsel from coast to coast, and we've been able to feature high caliber speakers like the two we have today, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. I'm wondering, are you here for the first time, or have you been with us before? It looks like we have 36%, first-time attendees, so welcome. Thanks for joining us today, and hello to the returning folks. I'm glad to have you back. Let's get to today's event. Key metrics and KPIs for in-house counsel, a guide for in-house lawyers to develop and quantify their organizational value. Our two panelists today are Jessica Nguyen and Laurie Ehrlich. Jessica is the Chief Legal Officer of Lexion, the simple legal ticketing system and AI-powered contract management solution. Jessica has an extensive and broad in-house legal career at companies of various sizes and stages in the technology space. Prior to Lexion, she was the General Counsel of PayScale, Microsoft attorney supporting Outlook email, and the first in-house attorney at Avalara. Jessica has been recognized as the 2020 Startup PC of the Year by Corporate Counsel Magazine, 2019 Top 100 Influencer by Best Under 40 by the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, and a 2018 Puget Sound Business Journal 40 Under 40. Our next panelist is Laurie Ehrlich. Laurie is the Chief Commercial Counsel at Datadog, one of the leading monitoring and security platforms for cloud applications, helping businesses to secure their systems, avoid downtime, and ensure customers are getting the best user experience. Laurie's primary focus is on creating scalable processes to ensure the commercial legal team's ability to continue to provide excellent and timely support to internal stakeholders as Datadog continues its rapid growth. We are so lucky to have Laurie and Jessica on to guide us on how to develop and quantify our organizational value, which is substantial. I will say, sight unseen, our organizational value is substantial, and they're going to help us bear that out even more. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jessica to get us started.
Thanks, Shahai, for that. I'm always impressed when you do those intros for 9 minutes without having to use the bathroom or drink a beverage. Please blink twice to prove that you are not a robot. All right, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Jessica. I'm so excited to present with Laurie. Laurie and I go way back. I first met Laurie at a club, jamming and popping and locking to 50 Cent in the club. And I knew she knew her legal metrics and KPIs when she popped and locked it. I'm kidding. I actually just met Laurie last year at a conference speaking at the same topic on legal metrics and KPIs. So I wish we had a more glamorous and fun history, but I think that's pretty cool, Laurie, and you are pretty cool. Before we kick it off about metrics and data, super fun and exciting, I thought it'd be great to share some context with you all about who we are, our backgrounds, our legal team size, our industry, to give you the story to give you the color as to why certain metrics and KPIs were important for our organizations to measure and track. Laurie, do you want to kick it off?
Sure.
Feel free to pop it and lock it if you want.
I'm not. I'm more of a lyrical dancer. I can do lots of that kind of movement, but popping and locking, I don't got it.
Oh, not bad.
Hi, everyone. So I am, as mentioned, the Chief Commercial Counsel at Datadog. We have about 3,000 employees globally as a company, and we have about 35 legal professionals in our legal team, and we have 10 people in our commercial team under me. And I will say, I think it adds color. Before I was at Datadog, I was at Cognizant. I did commercial contracting as our chief counsel for our insurance vertical for many years, and I decided that there were smarter ways of doing things than the way we were doing them, and I essentially established the legal ops function at Cognizant and had my first, let's say, daily interfacing with Excel sheets. And really, I think I would say I honed my metrics and KPI skills in that role.
Yeah.
I think, Jessica, in terms of what you wanted me to.
Yeah, no, I wanted to give color. As you know, the audience here is from companies of all different sizes, stages, and industries, and legal team sizes. So really what's important and what to measure and track for KPIs and metrics are going to vary. And it depends.
And I'll say, at Cognizant is a 300 plus legal department.
Okay.
The company is 300,000 people. So it's a very different scale than where we are at Datadog. On the other hand, a very stable, slower moving company, whereas Datadog's growth is over 100% year over year. It's a very different way of doing business.
Right, absolutely. Similarly, so I came from Microsoft, and as you imagine, the legal team there is over 1,000 employees. I mean, 1,000 in the legal department alone, 100,000 plus employees globally. So what was measured there was very different than where I had more control and over the legal function, which was at PayScale, at Lexion, and even at Avalara, where the legal team was sub 5 people. The company size ranged from 50 to 500. And the industry was B2B technology, SaaS, so and generally in hyper growth mode. So which is going to be why the metrics and data that I have focused on have been very much on revenue generating and cost savings and operational efficiencies, but very much a heavy focus on revenue generation. All right, so with that color, I wanted to first kick off our slide about, well, what metrics and KPIs are right to be tracked? And the good old answer is, it depends. Of course it depends. Like not all metrics, not every organization, legal team should be tracking the same type of metrics and focusing on it. It really is dependent on what is your why and what is the problem you were brought in to solve, which you need to get alignment with the leadership team from. Here are the general factors: revenue growth, cost savings, efficiencies in operations, and compliance and risk mitigation. My general experience is when a company is in hyper growth mode, revenue growth is more of a hyper focus, and scaling operational efficiencies. Because if your company is growing like Datadog, I wish my companies are always growing 100% year over year. You don't want to have your legal budget also grow 100% year over year, right? Laurie, is there anything that you would like to add to this bullet that I may have missed? It's okay, I missed stuff.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, that these are often the 4 things that every organization has to figure out where their priority is at that moment. And it doesn't mean you can only have one of them. You can have multiple priorities in these areas. But I was always told you should have more than 2 big goals at a time. And because if you have too many, then you're spreading it out too thin.
Right.
And so I do think it's important to not say, oh, I'm trying to do all of these things. You of course are always trying to do all of these things, but when you set KPIs, you don't want to set KPIs in every area. You really want to focus on today's priority is.
Right. I love that. Someone much smarter than me once told me, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So yes, you need to have, you must have really, really clear objectives and priorities. And yeah, especially when you have limited resources like legal teams do like us, especially when you're in-house. All right, the next slide, 3-step framework for metric success.
Did you want to talk about data versus metrics versus KPIs?
Yes, this is the slide I was going to kick it off in. Yeah, so Laurie, before we even dive into the actual specific metrics that we would suggest for you to measure, and we're going to have a list for y'all, and it's also the materials that Shai put in the Slack, the chat channel. Laurie, I know you have strong thoughts on what is the difference between data and metrics versus actual KPIs.
So I think of it like writing a paper. The data is your facts. They are the the numbers, right? That's what the data is. It's just the numbers. It's not any analysis. It's just the numbers. The metrics are kind of your building blocks to get from data to KPIs. Metrics are what comes out of the data. So you have numbers, you crunch them, you arrange them, you create maps out of them and graphs. I love pivot charts. They're my favorite tool. So the metrics are actually putting meaning behind the data. And then the KPIs are using that meaning to set the objectives.
Got it. Yeah. So you are much more thoughtful than I am. Fun fact, when Laurie and I did that presentation together last year at the conference, it was a Women in Power and Law, I believe, in DC, about a year ago, last fall. Laurie did we were, think of school projects where Laurie did all of the work, and then all I did was add 4 memes. You're welcome. So that's how she thinks, right? And at a high level, how I think more about is KPIs is the goal, the benchmark that you want to measure as a basis of, this is a metric or a number that I want to improve year over year or quarter over quarter, whatever the cadence is for your organization. When I think about legal, a lot of the KPIs that I have seen put in place for the legal function have so many dependencies. We are a support function and we help enable success, but we have dependencies in others. So that's what I think of KPIs as sort of a target number and a benchmark to give you direction and a goal. And then the metrics and the data support that, right? You have to actually measure progress with the data. All right. So here's a 3-step metric for success. The number 1 really is the core, where you have to start with your why. You have to figure out, what am I trying to do here? Laurie, do you have any stories you would like, clear anecdotes, specific KPIs you set or objectives you set, and then the associated metrics or data you collected to fix that problem, right? The KPI is tied to some problem that your organization encountered. I would love to hear your stories. I'm sure that everyone here too would as well.
So as Shai mentioned, my mandate right now is to create scalability. And in order to create scalability, I think one of my big priorities is take legal out of the equation where legal doesn't need to be in the equation. And so one of my KPIs, and it didn't have numbers because when I joined this organization, I didn't know, I had data, but I couldn't yet put metrics and KPIs around that data because I needed to spend more time finding the right data sets. And so actually, the first thing I did was just triage everything that was coming in so I could get a picture of what it was and figure out what data I was missing in order to make a decision on where legal could come out, essentially. So one of the things that I did is I noticed that we were getting lots of requests for things that legal didn't handle. So I'm very fortunate. I walked into an organization where a team other than legal handles DocuSigns. Thank God. And so we get lots of requests, for example, for signature requests. We got lots of requests for order forms. And luckily, again, we have another department, Deal Desk, which handles our orders. And so it was slowing the organization down because there was an additional cycle time of request to legal saying, no, we don't handle this. And plus it took time off of legal pay because I think everyone knows when you have task switching, you lose more time than the time it takes to complete the task because you have the time that you took to step away, to understand what it was, to respond to it, and then to get back to where you were before. And so from an organizational efficiency standpoint, getting rid of these wrong process requests was very important to me.
Yeah.
And so my KPI was I wanted to substantially cut down on wrong process requests. So the first thing I did was I actually added a way to track that data. So we have an intake system, which is wonderful. If you do not have an intake system, you need to get an intake system. Email is not a way to ever gather data. So I added a manual collection in the intake system for all of our commercial team members to indicate when it was a wrong process, what the wrong process was. And then I looked at that data and identified which requesting team had the most wrong process requests, and which types of wrong process requests there were. And then I did for the most egregious, which was the signature requests. I did 3 things. One, I put in kind of a fake dummy request selection for signature requests that people couldn't actually submit. It just said, sorry, this is actually not the right team, submit it here instead. And I did training. And the result of those 2 together, so because I found a way to collect data and I could analyze it, I started at a 20% wrong process percent in the first quarter that we were tracking this data. And through the training and the kind of the self-help, so to speak, automation, we were able to drop it down to 6%, which from given the volumes of legal review requests that are coming in, we're talking about, hundreds of requests that no longer were coming to legal.
Yeah. How large is your sales team?
About 1,000.
Oof. So Shai, my bad. Laurie's story reminded me that we have a poll. Shai, can you run that poll about data collection and maturity? So while you're talking about that, I'll share some stories as well. The slide here just shows a list of some sample metrics that you can consider collecting and measuring and tracking to analyze. So my story is a bit different from Laurie. I love your stories, Laurie, about because we all feel it, like, why is legal doing this? This is not my job, or this is the wrong place to go. Unfortunately, generally lawyers and legal professionals are very detail oriented and have a lot of knowledge about operations, so everyone comes to us for answers. So that's a super common problem. Other things to track that are not on this list, which is very revenue focused and cost savings focused, is with your intake system and reporting system, whether it be a spreadsheet or a ticketing system, track, is this work high value or low value, or strategic or not strategic, something that other track. So you can measure, oh my gosh, how much of work, a percentage of my work of my team who are not cheap, right? Generally speaking, working on low value, non-strategic tasks. Other things I have to use with a ticketing system is is the project being done by outside counsel or us? So that I can show metrics to the CFO and the leadership team, in addition to Laurie, wrong request, not legal's job. Is this low value, high value? Are we optimizing our resources? And two, maybe we need more headcount. We're sending 30% of our projects to outside counsel. Those are really simple fields or tags you can add to an intake system and track, and very compelling data to justify your needs, whether it be justifying time. Because actually, Laurie, it's great that you were able to do that training and see success. Oftentimes, I have to be persuasive in getting time with the sales enablement team and get FaceTime with the sales team to say, look, I want to, they're so focused on selling a product, they don't really want to focus on operations training. So sometimes you need here's data that shows we need operations training, related training. So good for you.
There's a question in the chat about how long to collect data. And so I think that's actually a really, really good question that I want to talk about for a little bit. In the wrong process case, we actually are continuing to collect that data because our sales teams have a lot of turnover. And so it's and everyone says it's not Datadog, it's the sales industry right now is a little bit insane. But I think training is really important, and it's a way of identifying which teams need more training. And so it's a data point that we keep collecting. And there are things I don't keep collecting. So for example, in order to plan staffing for this year, last year, I had everyone identify what Jessica was talking about before, whether matters were high complexity, medium, or low complexity. And I only did that for a quarter because over time, our stats are really going to be the same in that area in terms of and on the sales side, there's really kind of, the most complicated is always going to be customer paper. The easiest is going to be NDAs, and then there's kind of the mix in between. And so once I had kind of the percentage of those, that balance between high, medium, and low, I didn't need to keep having my attorneys manually collect that data.
Yeah. There's also a question in the chat about discerning what is high value or low value. Again, that's going to also depend on your organization. So I'm going to put my pay scale general counsel hat back on. And at one point, the organization was trying to improve efficiencies and making sure legal wasn't working on SMB low dollar value contracts. So getting alignment with the CFO and sales leaders was one way that we work. Well, look, we don't want sales legal working on deals sub 50,000 a year or 25,000 a year. That number will evolve as your organization evolves and grows as well. So I think at one point it was we started off at 10,000 because we were working on everything. Then it became to 25,000, and then it became 50,000. So again, what is a high value, low value? Really, again, it depends the stage of your organization. That number might be even much bigger if you're, my friends in Amazon Web Services, they have a much higher threshold, as you can imagine. It is like millions before anyone in legal, a contract manager, will touch a contract. So, all right. There's other questions about what tooling and ticketing system we will use, and we are going to get to that. I am biased. I use Lexion. Fun fact. Spoiler. And I love it because I helped build it. So there is a lot of bias there based on my personal experience. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about a new slide about how to set KPIs. Do you want to share some stories, Laurie, about KPIs and what you set, and some stories of success, why you set it, and the results from actually measuring that metric or that KPI?
When I started doing legal ops at Cognizant at the same time got a new CEO, and his ask to our GC was, you tell me, how do I know when you are successful as a legal department? And that, of course, then came to me. And so we started with just the generics, like, we use benchmarking. Are we aligned with industry peers in terms of, legal department spend, internal legal department spend, external legal department spend, number of headcounts, headcount is number of headcounts, redundant, headcount. And it's benchmarking is really hard, because it's really hard to figure out like what's included. Like, is this organization that's answering the question, is their compliance and their government affairs part of their legal department, or are they separate from their legal department? And so, you have to take all of that with like a huge shaker of salt. But a lot of times leadership outside of legal are numbers-based people, and you have to have numbers behind your storytelling. And for Cognizant, we knew that we were very understaffed, and our big goal was, how do we show the organization that we are understaffed? And which isn't really, it's not so much a KPI as like, this is our objective. And I think, we weren't trying to indicate that our performance was great. We were more trying to say, tell the story. That's really, KPIs are stories. They are the story that you are sharing with the rest of the world. And sometimes that story is, I'm doing great because, and sometimes that story is, we need transformation and this is why. And this was a we need transformation and this is why type of story. And so we went about doing an analysis of the workload that we had. And so it was a mix of hard data and storytelling data, not actually based on the numbers. So we were able to quantify the number of different types of matters everybody on the commercial team was doing, and then put kind of an estimate of like, on average, this type of matter takes this much time. And then we could calculate the number of hours total the legal department was spending and the number of people. And we're easily able to show that people were working, 70-hour weeks. And so that's one of the ways that we kind of set an objective and use data to tell the story of that objective.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the last two organizations that I have supported, Lexion and also PayScale, the objective was revenue growth. You know, these are companies in hyper growth mode, and some of the I'm going to put a PayScale experience on. One of the challenges PayScale experienced before I started, and then why they brought me on was they were having challenges closing enterprise deals. Selling to the large enterprise is a lot harder and takes a lot longer, and there's a lot more processes in place than selling to SMB or even the basically a smaller company. We all get it. And so, it was great to have a KPI of there are three big things that a sales organization measures. Are they hitting their sales quota, their revenue targets? What is the customer acquisition cost? So what is the total sales and marketing cost it costs on average, and what is the payback amount, right? So it costs maybe like a year and a half or a year before all your costs based on revenue, you get paid back by each customer procured. And also another one is speed, the sales cycle. How long does it take to close a customer? In terms of legal contribution to those three general buckets for sales metrics, and there's various nuances of it, of course, and how we contribute to that. In terms of at PayScale, we clearly provided great value in helping with conversion. So before in 2016, the conversion for PayScale was X amount, and it was bad, it was low. And then in 2017, after I was hired and brought on a legal team and created some improvements in the process and some maturity and talk tracks to the sales team about how to navigate the enterprise sales process, leveraging a Microsoft experience, the conversion rate improved by 25%. And there were no significant product updates or improvements. That's it. It was the difference. So the data was directional, right? It was, hey, why do we see a 25% improvement in closing enterprise deals? We didn't have a huge major product update, but we did bring on a much more mature legal function. In addition to that, the sales cycle improved in the enterprise segment. So it went from something like atrocious, like 12 plus months to about 9 months. So setting those KPIs, so a lot of it though is not just dependent on legal, but we are a big player in the success of the sales team. And it was a story that we use the KPIs of our improvement to help improve conversion of enterprise and speed of enterprise deals as our success, as a measure of success for legal at PayScale. The following year, this thing called GDPR went into effect. And that just threw all the data all messed up, right? Because everyone was trying to, use their own paper for data processing addendums, and also throwing in a lot of language and clauses in the DPA that really wasn't GDPR required. And so you had to negotiate it. It slowed down the sales cycle, etc. It was a big pain in my legal career, I'm sure for many of us here as well. So we had to shift our KPIs a bit, and we looked at win rates. So what I did was I looked into the legal maturity and narrative of the direct key competitors of PayScale, and saw that they didn't have Privacy Shield, they didn't have a good DPA in place, they didn't even have a general counsel. So what did we do in legal? We got all of that in place. We made it a click-through DPA. We spent weeks training the sales team with key talk tracks about why they should pick us, a much more mature, compliant, a company than our direct competitors who had a prettier user interface, honestly. And what was the result of all that training? We had an 85% win rate against our key direct competitors in the enterprise segment. So thinking through all of that, think about what are the key revenue goals, and how does legal contribute to that? Laurie, you're nodding your head. You work with sales a lot, so you're like, oh, I know this.
And actually, we have so this year, it's kind of like getting some more things in shape. And then next year, our focus is really going to be shortening the time from start to end for the revenue cycle on enterprise sales. And I have a couple of different plans for that, but a lot of that is going to be data-driven analysis to get there. And so we're going to be looking at, we are tracking the number of turns that we do.
Mhm.
Right? I can't control how long it takes the customer to look at paper and come back to those changes, but I do have some influence on the number of turns by potentially having better starting places or having better playbook resources so that my team members can make decisions faster and easier. And the other thing we're tracking is friction points on contracts. So we have a tool, I'm not going to mention if it's a competitor of Jessica's, but we have a tool that will allow me to see the percentage of time that customers have agreed to our standard language for each clause
Mhm.
of our contract. And I can measure that by looking at from the first turn of the contract that we got back from the customer to the final closed document, the difference in terms of disagreement
Mhm.
to our position versus the end result. And the places where that gap is large are places where I can probably change how our contract's worded to reduce confusion or give more information to the customer to get us to a better starting place. So we have like a customer FAQ document that explains, honestly, it starts with explaining what is SaaS, because a lot of people who buy us, the people who are negotiating, I should say, don't necessarily understand what SaaS means from a contracting perspective. So we start with explaining that. But the whole point is in terms of the data, most of the time, if you get the opposing side to your counterparty to come all the way to your position, it's not because they needed that point in the contract. It's probably because they didn't understand it. And so
Mhm.
we're using that data in order to inform what our contract terms should be and inform us of when they're creating unnecessary friction. And then we get to keep going back. Like every time we have a new iteration of our MSA, we can see, how has that changed? Are we still getting friction on the same point, or has that friction been reduced?
Absolutely. So this is a key thing to track is I think that's very detailed when because you're doing an analysis of at a deeper level of clauses. What are the specific clauses that are causing friction? I think a lot of us here know what those the major players are, limitation liability, indemnity, termination rights, etc. But what are the other clauses that are not necessarily always negotiated that you can streamline and simplify or make simpler or more buyer or user friendly to reduce the friction. I love that, Laurie. Other very simple metrics that I have implemented in Lexion to track is this first party. I tag whether or not the project is on our template or on third party template, and which is just a little click of a button, yes or no. And then I'm able to pull out a report from start to finish. This is how long it takes for a legal review of a deal on first party paper versus third party, and showing that data to sales leadership as incentive to, because I think it all takes the same amount of time. They have no idea. They just forward paper and they'd be like, this should be easy peasy. Can I have this by, in the next hour? Not true. Shy, actually, can you roll poll number 2? We have another poll for y'all. Fun. Let's see what we got.
Jessica, while people are doing this poll, I'm just thinking about what you did at PayScale was showing that you were a more compliant organization. But I will say that thinking about what information your counterparty is going to need in order to sign the deal with you is there's actually a really close correlation there between operational efficiencies and revenue growth. That by anticipating what your customer is going to need, you're more likely to win that deal. But you also are saving time by creating those materials in advance. And so you can just share them when you need them. So I really love that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this is less legal and more sales. And remember I mentioned earlier that there's so many dependencies. Like legal KPIs is really, I think of as a numerical quantifiable benchmark of success. You have a status quo and you want to improve that metric over time. But it's not necessarily legal's fault if that number isn't improved upon, right? There's so many dependencies. And so really rolling out a more mature and execution of better talk tracks to overcome objections on data protection, GDPR was a team effort. We provided the collateral and the training, but we needed the effort of the management, the support of management and PayScale's sales enablement function. So as PayScale, before we dive into system and tools, there's a lot of questions about this in the chats. as PayScale matured and was bought out by a private equity firm, and for a lot of the folks here who work for more mature organizations, operational efficiencies became the organizations became more hypersensitive to that, to be very honest. And so what we had to track, we shifted the metrics, or we added to the metrics we wanted to track of what were the average dollar values of the deals legal touched. We wanted to be as high as possible at PayScale. So that became a metric that we closely monitored. And what was legal spend relative to revenue? So legal spend or cost relative to the average contract value of a customer deal, and legal spend overall relative to the revenue of the organization, and tracking that percentage on a regular cadence to make sure, are there efficiencies? That number should not, improve over time. Any sort of operational efficiency metrics or KPIs, Laurie, that your team tracked at Cognizant or at Datadog that may be helpful for the audience here?
Yep. So we track a lot of data. And I was very lucky when I got to Datadog because it was already set up, like there was already intake in Salesforce. There wasn't a lot of reports created. And what I really did is I took that data and turned it into actionable reports. So I can look at, one of the things that we track is obviously the number of requests for each sales group by type of request. And so that really lets me get a year-over-year comparison of the numbers and where they're going, which helps me a lot with planning what staffing I'm going to need. And I layer that information with what the sales team's goals are. So I know, how many new logos are supposed to come in. I know how many people are being hired, and I can use that against the prior year's sales goals and how many requests we were getting from those. And I can track it like enterprise versus commercial versus mid-market, EMEA versus America. And so I'm really able to do great forecasting in terms of what my needs are going to be by looking at that data. And then I use it, of course, to manage workloads for my attorney. So we have automatic assignments, but I can go to somebody and say, hey, you should be using the overflow column because you have way too much on your plate right now. And I know you have way too much on your plate now because I have total visibility into what you're working on. So that's been really good. And then we track, to your point, the customer paper versus our own paper, and that and the time it takes to close, customer paper versus our own paper. I will say though that it's a slightly false number. It will always take longer on customer paper, but it will also always take longer on customer paper because those are the organizations that are likely to have more bureaucracy. And so those cycle times are almost always likely to be longer, even if they are on your paper, if that makes sense. There's just more hoops on that for those organizations to get through in order to close the contract. But it is always faster on if you're a SaaS company. Not necessarily true for professional services, but if you like Cognizant, we were almost always on customer paper, and that was fine because each deal was a bespoke deal and you could really meet the customer's needs.
Right.
And you balance that with how much it costs to deliver what the customer needs. But for SaaS, you're delivering the same thing over and over and over again. Your contract talks about what you actually do. It's significantly more efficient because you just have to take all of your terms and put it into the customer paper if you're on customer paper. So we track those turnaround times, and then we have thresholds for negotiation, and I've taken legal out of the picture for those approvals because I really don't need to argue back and forth with salespeople as to whether an exception is justified or not. So I've essentially assigned that to sales leadership. And now I'm tracking the approval rate for each of our sales leaders that approve an exception. So I can go to then our CRO and say, hey, this guy's approving 80% of the time. That's not a good use of our legal resources. You really want us to spend our effort on the accounts that are bringing us higher revenue.
What was
but I forgot.
Well, any tips or tricks on even setting those thresholds? Because I think a lot of us are going to see resistance to setting thresholds. They'd be like, no, we should be doing whatever it takes to get the deal done.
So I'll say this, when you tell sales leadership, I'm going to set thresholds, but you can grant exceptions, that helps tremendously. You need to give the top level decision makers a way around it. If you tell them that they have to play by the rules too, they're going to completely shut it down. So you need that leadership buy-in. And that leadership buy-in is also you will do better if we close more deals with higher revenue and don't delay those. And if we're spending all of our time on very small deals, we're not going to get to the big deals.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously there are different stakeholders in leadership. So there's also the, what's an appropriate risk profile for our organization? And you don't want to introduce more risk than the value of the contract. And anytime you negotiate terms, you have more risk because you can't automate it anymore. It's custom.
Right. Right.
So in terms of setting the thresholds, what I do is one of the other data slicers is the ARR of the relevant deal. And so I can see like how many matters we're getting in each revenue bucket. And I use that to kind of think about like what's a good bell curve, so to speak, in terms of the time and effort. And then I think, it's going to change. It's going to be really different based on your market share. And I'll tell you, some of the smaller companies that we've acquired at Datadog were never on customer paper because they were just like, we have no lawyer, so we just can't do it. That's what it is. And then you really like, even I understand their exceptions. Like I know certain deals when they come to me, I don't really need to wait for sales leadership to approve. I just know that customer and I know that it's never going to happen. We're going to have to negotiate. And so you just have to add, I think, a layer of reasonability to setting those thresholds.
So related to this slide, actually, I can't track all of these chat, but a good question in a chat that I did see was getting buy-in from the business and internal clients on adopting a ticketing system or intake process to help capture the metrics and KPIs we've been talking about. I'll share my personal experience and then Laurie, you can go. My personal experience is if the sales team or the rest of the business has to learn a new tool or a new process, it ain't gonna happen. Or it ain't gonna happen. There are I'm very empathetic. At Lexion, I train new sales folks all the time, and they're just overwhelmed with putting in data into the CRM, learning how to demo the product, following up with the customer. I mean, that's already overwhelming for most salespeople. So having them learn another SaaS tool that isn't their CRM, that isn't Slack or Teams, and that isn't email, which they're monitoring to monitor conversations with their prospect, ain't gonna happen. So I got friction when I tried to introduce what was essentially, it was called a Jot form, but it's like a Google form or something like that at PayScale, because they were like, if it ain't in Salesforce, Jessica, it's not going to happen. So I took that experience of triage, not a great one, that I was forced to triage an email at PayScale and then use the email to fill out manually spreadsheets. That's what I did at PayScale because I couldn't get buy-in from leadership for a better intake system. That's the honest truth. It was a hard lesson, a very painful lesson, but inspired me to join Lexion, where now Lexion really integrates with your email. Any legal request, legal at PayScale, now would automatically be tied into Lexion, whether it be an IP question, privacy question, contract review question, vendor contract question, automatically tracked in Lexion, and all legal team members are alerted, or however you want to configure it, right? Who's the owner of that type of project? So I took that really powerful lesson of resistance to build a system that requires no change management by the rest of the organization. In addition, you can submit a legal request that's linked to Lexion from Salesforce. Again, sales is not going to leave CRM or email or chat. So those are some hard lessons I learned at PayScale and other places as well that inspired Lexion through my influence and our customer influence to build integrations that it seems like the rest of the business is not learning another tool. Laurie, you're nodding too. You probably have faced the same resistance.
You have to make sure there's no friction. I mean, that's the whole, there cannot be friction. So my rule of thumb is, if possible, intake should be through a system that your stakeholder already uses.
Yes.
So Datadog is a very Jira-based organization for everyone except for sales. So for example, our product and our IP team uses Jira. They have a Jira board. Anyone can open a ticket on the Jira board because all of their stakeholders, product and engineering, are already using Jira. They're very used to Jira. They understand it. And Jira, you can create kind of like form cards so that there's certain data points that they have to fill in. Our sales team never leaves Salesforce. Therefore, anything I want the sales team to do has to be in Salesforce. Yeah. I am insanely lucky at Datadog. Our Salesforce team is the best partner I could ever ask for. They collaborate with me on a daily basis, pretty much, on making the changes that I want to make. At Cognizant, that was not the case. I could not get any changes to Salesforce.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a workaround. And, a lot of times the fight is money. Like, we don't want us as an organization spend money. I will put money down that there are very few people on this call that don't have some system in the organization that they can use for intake. Almost everybody has some, if you're on Microsoft Teams, if you're on Google Drive, like every one of these different kind of CRM systems that everyone's using these days all have some sort of form system capability. So you can create intake through that. That's what we did at Cognizant. I desperately needed intake. I needed to know what our commercial attorneys were doing. And I did not get a lot of love from our legal team in doing this, but I was able to get buy-in, and pretty much people were just told, you have to do it. And we had about 70% compliance from just the top-down mandate on that. Some people were more bought in than others, because some people understood, hey, if we have this data, we can show that you're doing too much work
Yes.
and get
Yes.
more people. But without this data, I can't tell that story. And that's really powerful. Telling people the why behind why you're doing it is very powerful. But still, people hate to track data. To the point I saw in the chat that you go in-house so you can stop tracking your time in 6-minute increments. Totally true. I lost my watch the first day I went in-house.
That's hilarious.
What we did at Cognizant is we had SharePoint and we had Microsoft Forms. And so we created an intake form that lived on our content management system. And people could just click a button. And the truth on intake forms is keep it simple, stupid.
Yep.
You want to have as few questions as possible to achieve your results. Now, we all need more information. The more information that gets shared, the faster we can turn things around. But just think about what makes more sense in a conversation versus what you put on the form. Like, the form should be limited to just what you need in order to get the data point that you need and kind of do the work triaging so they can be directed to the right person or right team.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the only way to get adoption, right? So the way that we have done it at now Lexion, now that I actually have an intake system as opposed to email plus a manually filled out spreadsheet, is the intake form has certain required fields that our sales team has to fill out. And then our legal team here will fill out the rest. And they're incentivized to, because they understand the why. They understand that, like, I can then pull a monthly or quarterly reporting showing growth in, actually, an interesting thing at Lexion, because we sell legal technology. Actually, our legal team does a lot of marketing work. We do a lot of content drafting and content review and creating decks, like the deck that you see here today. And so I have been tracking that, and we've been using Lexion as our own personal to-do reporting. We're not tracking 6-minute increments, thank God, like time, but to tracking the volume of marketing projects. I was able to show to our CEO that we do 30% of our workload is marketing content related and marketing presentations related. And so we now are hiring a content marketing manager. He was like, wow, I don't want you spending time doing all that content review and actually drafting it. So again, I think understanding that we are the legal team's incentivized to track this data has been successful, and what it leads to, the results of that.
Hey, Jessica, there's a question in the chat that I want to address.
Yeah.
Karen asked, what's a reasonable period of time to get an intake system in place and track data? And much like Jessica's start, the answer is it depends. Anytime you do change management, that takes time. Figuring out in the first place what you're doing and how you're doing it is going to take time, and how much effort people put into it takes time. So it's really there's no going to be one right answer for an implementation. It depends what system you're using, how much needs to be built versus out of the box. And then again, the change management is going to be the most important. How much time do people need to learn it? How much time do people need to get comfortable with the idea? And then I think also the most important thing with implementation of any type of change is you kind of have to take away whatever people were doing before in order to get full compliance with using a new way of doing things. And so you kind of have to look at your adoption percentages and use those as kind of a measure of when it's time to take away the other tool that people were using.
Yeah. I mean, your intake system can be as simple or complex as you design it. If you, as Laurie suggested, keep it very simple, and as frictionless as possible, you can literally set up an intake system in days. You just have to understand what are the intake forms you want for reporting and tracking purposes, and what is the data and metrics you want. So you can control that. If you've already been thinking about that, you've been tracking it in a spreadsheet, you can probably set up an intake system in a week, within a week. You can definitely do that with Lexion for sure. But then the adoption issue is something you need to measure progress over time. You're not going to get 100% adoption day one. So, I'm going to be very honest, even at Lexion, it took some time for the salespeople to use and adopt Lexion 100% successfully. Luckily, it's all just through email and through Salesforce integration, and they stay there and they live there. So we had high success of adoption. We rolled out in one Slack message and one email, got 50% adoption immediately. But then the salesperson forgot. And again, they started Slack. We have a small legal team. So they would Slack us again, can you help me with X? And I'm like, don't forget to fill out, a Lexion intake form to submit an email to legal@Lexion AI, and it'll go there. So it takes a little bit of training and measuring that progress over time. But I think the key is we now have 100% adoption, but the tree was like, they don't have to learn another tool. Like they don't have to go into Lexion ever to submit a request. But I'm really, me and the legal team are the power users of Lexion, and we own that, right? And we use it for tracking and reporting, but I'm just grateful not to have to manually input a spreadsheet, or my team had to manually input a spreadsheet of what they're working on in status. What I'm showing you here is, because I have dummy data and Laurie does not, just some fake data of what the Lexion dashboard looks like. So you can easily triage. One of the challenges I have when I was at PayScale and triaging through Slack messages and email was I had no idea if someone was already on a project, what the status was of a project in flight, who had the ball. Was it legal, our team, or was it the counterparty, or was it a different internal business function? So having this quick visibility to all the tasks in flight is super helpful. Laurie, you might have a different view, but any suggestions or thoughts for folks?
We use Jira for the same thing. I have on the Jira board, we have the intake column, and we have an automatic assignment based on what it is that's come in. And then I have the in legal review. I have with counterparty, with requester, because sometimes it's what are you actually asking me to do here type question. We have with other Datadog team members that are not legal. And then we have send for signature, done. Also, we have a gone dark column because things do go dark.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we have that too. We have metrics like that too. So I'm just showing you folks here, I'm a very visual person, some dashboards from our demo account. But what you can with a technology and not doing it all manually through email and spreadsheets, the value of technology is whatever system you choose, it is so helpful and powerful that I can screenshot, last quarter. I can also choose filter by the hyper project. Is it IP questions or privacy work or employment work? The volume of work over time. So I've done this on a yearly basis, quarterly basis, and I send this to the leadership team to measure this, to think about our resource planning. Lexion has been very conservative in our headcount and our growth, actually, despite most startups being like super growth mode, who are now in super layoff mode. But because we're so conservative, I actually track all this data. So this is the kind of data you can track with technology and systems, which I think has been very helpful. Here's just another example. This is my favorite dashboard, honestly. I already know that my team is busy, but just showing that being able to filter by select date range and type of work, and then let's say it's customer contract review. I can show the average time under legal review for customer contracts is a short period versus other stages. And this is very, very powerful because it's often, my experience is there's a misperception that internal legal is the bottleneck of any sort of legal negotiations. Any other visuals or you would add, Laurie? I know this is all fake dummy data because you didn't have time to scrub your Salesforce intake data, and that's all proprietary and confidential.
I love pie charts. I track the year over year, and so that's been that's a line chart with each type of request is in a different color, or I can do the same type of request and each year is in a different color.
Yeah.
So that's been really useful. I have a lot of bar charts that are stacked bars. I love stacked bars. So I have, for example, number of requests from enterprise, and that bar is stacked between customer paper and Datadog paper. So I can see both the number of requests and comparing it to other teams. So I have a bar for commercial, a bar for enterprise, et cetera. And I can see for each of those teams at the same time the percentage of customer paper versus Datadog paper. So I really like that graphic a lot.
Very cool. Those are some out of the box charts that come with the Lexion product. And then, but also the whole it depends answer to tie back to the beginning, the metrics and KPIs you set will evolve based on the evolution of your company and the evolution of challenges your company encounters. That's the reality. So we also built in flexibility. So whatever fields you may have tracked one day in intake form, you may need to track new fields all of a sudden. Making change is key to your system. The flexibility of system is really key. And then flexibility in the type of reporting and analytics you can run and do yourself. So we made that very easy in Lexion. Any intake field that you have set up in your system, very flexible, you can run reporting and analytics on and customize your reports based on what the current challenges of the day for your organization. And so, as you know, obviously Lexion's a sponsor of this, but any sort of system or tool that you use, I do recommend having the self-serve capability, because when I'm dependent on a vendor, and unlike Datadog, I did not have a ton of Salesforce love from PayScale. To be fair, our sales ops team at PayScale was overloaded and had high churn. So if it can be as self-serve as possible and self-do as possible and simple, I would recommend that. Any other tips before we go?
I would also recommend that, but you also need to make sure that you have a team member who can own that system.
Yes.
Otherwise, it just won't be effective. Like systems need to be maintained. The health of a system needs to be constantly maintained and have the ability to change with your organization. And if you don't have the body that can actually do that work, it's just going to end up being a non-used system because it won't mature with your organization. I just want to also, in terms of what Jessica was saying about being able to collect any data you want, think about what data you're collecting. You want to balance the volume of data that you're collecting and the effort that it takes to collect that data. So I say, anything that you can collect through automation and then you can slice and choose what to pay attention to or not, that's fine. But once you start asking for manual entrance, that's effort. And that effort needs to be worthwhile to make that data point collection worthwhile.
Yeah.
Rather, the data point collection needs to be worthwhile to make the effort worth putting into it. So what you don't want to do is be so focused on the data collection that you've created additional work for your team members or for your stakeholders.
Absolutely. Well, that's the core of our presentation. Now we're in the Q&A. Any questions? Shai, I will admit I have not been monitoring a chat box as actively.
Yeah, so first, I just want to say thank you, Jessica and Laurie. This was a energetic, entertaining, informative.
On metrics and data and
that's
KPIs.
right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the chat box, just take my word for it, it's tons of good praise and thanks for the information. So thanks to you both for this presentation. I have a number of questions queued up, but if you have questions for Q&A, please put it in the chat and I will feed it to our presenters. So there was an interesting comment actually about whether KPIs and metrics will undercut autonomy by the legal team.
I think that attorneys have knee-jerk, absolutely not response on tracking turnaround times. That it's ingrained from the day you enter law school that the answer to every question is it depends. And if you are asking your attorneys to complete something by a particular time, they're going to revolt. Do not ask them to do that. I do think, however, there are certain things that you can that people get it. So make sure that the requester knows that their request has been received in some way is really important for maintaining a good relationship. And so I think having a KPI that you'll let somebody know that you've received their request, or have the system let people know. But that's like, it's great if you can automate that. But just letting people know, I think, is a reasonable turnaround time. And then another one is the in the door and easy documents like NDAs. A lot of organizations have a half-day turnaround time on NDAs because they're the thing that you need to have that first conversation, and you don't want to impede that sales cycle. But I would not even try on things that are, for the things that are requiring legal judgment, you shouldn't have, I don't think that you should have KPIs and SLAs. I think that your point that you do want autonomy, you do want people to give matters the time that they want, and anything that doesn't require that, you should be trying to automate and self-help and get legal out of the picture. And I think KPIs and SLAs are great for pushing the organization to elevate legal. And that was another question I saw, like, how do you are you really just making legal like a scrivener if you're adhering to KPIs and SLAs? And for me, like, I really do want to move legal up the value chain, so to speak. And so I try to take everything that doesn't require legal judgment off of the plates of legal. And sometimes that's off the plates of legal in terms of creating reusable materials for people. And sometimes it's off the plate of legal by having a different team manage it. And sometimes it's off the plate of legal by saying, we've decided that this is a risk that we are willing to tolerate and we won't look at these things anymore.
Yep. I agree with all of that, Laurie. I love that. I actually, in my personal experience, have found that having any sort of data or KPIs actually helps legal and raises visibility as to the value we bring to the table. Now, every other executive team is beholden to KPI. We need to keep that in mind. Sales, we talked about that. Marketing, they have KPIs too. They have MQL, marketing qualified leads, conversions, a funnel to maintain. They're beholden to that, their performance. Customer success or support, also beholden to KPIs. SLA on certainly speed of support, net retention revenue, etc. Legal, oftentimes nothing. So oftentimes just having some sort of metric, just setting it shows what we do and the value we bring to the table. What I have experienced is the KPIs have been more about, here's an area of operational inefficiency or a number that's not great. How can we improve this over time? And I make it, and it's expectation setting too. When you're setting those KPIs is, hey, if the numbers don't improve, it may not be our fault. These are the dependencies, sales execution, etc., and actually adoption or whatever it is. And then also, if the numbers don't look great, like remember I told you the story about how GDPR 2017, awesome year, legal came in, improved all these processes, simplified. 2018, GDPR slowed down a lot of deals because everyone was introducing DPAs in their paper. They were oftentimes unreasonable, but having the directional data, it was very helpful. And legal was not dinged for slowing down because of DPAs or the introduction of a new regulation like GDPR. And we had other data we pivoted to show our value, which was the win rate versus direct competitors.
Awesome. I guess the next question is, I want to take a deeper dive into standing up, these, I don't know if it's a process or what, but somebody going from zero to metric. Could we talk a little bit more about what the right place to start is? And I think starting with an intake plan or an intake form, right, is definitely step number one. But do you have advice on what the intake form should have on it? And is there a time frame that it makes sense to, kind of block out time to stand up this process?
I read a book on transforming while performing in terms of the blocking out time. So I think on blocking out time, you have to have kind of a reality check on what you can do. And that's going to be very different for different organizations, depending on how much staffing you have and how much time you have. But I tend to, just personally for me, I block out hours in my calendar. Maybe it's only an hour a week or half day a week, but I block out time that's dedicated to the things that will move us forward. You definitely, my husband told me this great story that he got in one of his skills training about two people chopping down a tree and how one kept stopping and the other one just kept going and going and going. And the one that kept stopping is the one whose tree was felled faster, because every time he stopped, he was sharpening the blade of his axe. You have to take that time to make things work better in order to achieve your goals faster. And so it's worthwhile to prioritize it. But of course, there are things that always need to get done. So I just would say, decide that this amount of time a week is going to be spent on it and make it happen and commit to it. In terms of the first steps, I think that take the time to really think about what is essential and start with that. I think I said before, what do you need in order to make sure that the work is going to the right person? And what do you need to make sure that you know what that work is in a way that you can report on whatever it is that you're trying to identify. So I just started at Cognizant, was just what is the matter and what is the business team making the request? That was all I needed in order to get things to the right place and be able to get some data on what we were actually doing.
I think what's foundational, if you're starting from absolute zero, is creating intake forms to measure or process what you do, how much you do, and how long does it take to do it, generally speaking. And the business doesn't want preciseness. You're not billing the business, in 0.6-minute increments, right? You just want to even when I was creating estimates for legal costs relative to average annual contract value for customers and our annual revenue, that was all estimates. I just used a baseline cost of $250 an hour, my estimate on how long it takes to review an NDA versus, and then just took that. Finance folks are all about the forecasting. They just want to understand the assumptions. And if they think the assumptions are reasonable, they would take that number and okay, that sounds reasonable, Jessica, that it takes that long and it costs that much. So, but again, foundationally, measure what you do, how much you do, and how long it takes for you to do it. Now, what that is, it will be dependent on your business. If you're supporting vendor or procurement, we'd be very different than if you're supporting sales. But if you just have that data to start with, that then will help you lead to more clarity, and you can go deeper later. But just start there, because right now most legal teams don't even have that.
And I'll just add, in terms of creating intake, you really don't need to buy a system. There is going to be some group in your organization that is doing intake already. And I recommend, if you aren't sure, talk to your IT team, because most likely your IT team has a ticketing system. Most IT teams do. And you can probably leverage that ticketing system. So Datadog's first intake system was I think Freshservice. And so things started there. That's where they started. And now, other people are moving. Now we're moving to Jira. So people are using Jira, but there's almost always something in your organization that some team is using somewhere for ticketing.
Yeah. Jira is, I think, an easy way to get adoption, because most engineering and product teams are already using Jira. I have used Jira to get on the radar of our product engineering team. I will say there's flexibility, but it's not quite built for legal. No, it's not. There's a little bit of gaps. And so plug for Lexion is that it is there's integration with e-signature. There's ability to track, there's and it automatically syncs to a repository, because when I use other ticketing systems, these are completely siloed systems. And so I still had to do a lot of manual tracking of approvals, manual separate siloed process for e-signature, and then manual saving of a saved document to whatever repository I was using at the time. It was at PayScale, SharePoint. So all of those, try to remove all those siloed processes would be optimal. But if you need to start somewhere, use existing systems or do it manually if you have zero budget.
Got it. Okay, that was a great discussion. Thank you for the tips. I sent out a last call for questions, so hopefully if there's no questions, I think we are going to wrap up here. So thank you, Jessica and Laurie. That was awesome. Lots of great tips, tricks, stories, funny jokes, not by me, by you. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. In-House Connect is on a little bit of a break, but we'll be back in mid-August. So we hope to see everybody back out there. And this recording will be up in about 7 to 10 days.